Huey was a soft-hearted 18-year-old who believed in love, loyalty, and trust. He wasn't the most outgoing person in college, but his charm came from his sincerity and kindness. His girlfriend Elena, the same age as him, was the opposite, vibrant, adventurous, and unafraid to take risks. Their contrasting personalities somehow worked perfectly, and for the past year, they had been the golden couple of their college. To Huey, Elena was his world. She was his first love, his confidant, and his best friend. He doted on her endlessly, doing everything he could to make her happy. Whenever she wanted to try something new or go somewhere exciting, Huey was there, ready to make her dreams come true. He loved her with a kind of innocence that many would envy. Elena loved Huey too, or at least she thought she did. He was sweet, dependable, and cared for her in a way no one else had. But deep inside, Elena felt a growing restlessness. She craved excitement, unpredictability, and the thrill of pushing boundaries. While Huey was a stable force in her life, he didn't satisfy her growing need for adventure, especially when it came to intimacy. Over time, Elena began to feel like their relationship had become routine. Huey's affection, once endearing, started to feel suffocating. She wanted more, something wild and unrestrained, something Huey could never give her. These thoughts haunted her, though she never expressed them to him. One Friday evening, their college announced a grand party to celebrate the end of midterms. It was the kind of event everyone looked forward to: loud music, free drinks, and a chance to let loose. Huey and Elena were no exception. Elena, in particular, was excited. She spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, a short red dress that accentuated her curves. Huey, ever the supportive boyfriend, complimented her endlessly as they got ready together at his apartment. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes full of admiration. Elena smiled, but there was something distant in her expression. "Thanks, babe. Let's make tonight unforgettable." As they arrived at the party, the atmosphere was electric. The music boomed, students danced with wild abandon, and the drinks flowed freely. Huey and Elena stuck together at first, mingling with their classmates and enjoying the night. Huey, always attentive, made sure Elena had everything she needed: a drink in her hand, a seat when she got tired, and his undivided attention. But Elena's mind was elsewhere. She noticed Huey's 6 close friends, Ryan, Cole, David, Lucas, Brandon, and Jake, hanging out near the bar. She had always been friendly with them, but tonight she felt a strange pull toward them. They were rowdy, confident, and exuded the kind of raw energy she found intoxicating. As the night went on, Elena's thoughts became darker and more reckless. A dangerous idea began to form in her mind, a fantasy she had entertained in secret but never dared to act on. She had always been curious about the thrill of being with multiple people, and tonight, surrounded by alcohol and adrenaline, the temptation was too strong to resist. Elena began to flirt subtly with Huey's friends, catching their eyes and smiling in a way that left little to the imagination. They noticed, of course, exchanging knowing glances and grins. Huey, oblivious to what was happening, continued to chat with his classmates, his back turned to the silent game Elena was playing. Finally, Elena decided to act. She leaned close to Huey and whispered, "I'm going to the bathroom with Carla to fix my makeup. We might take a while, so don't worry." Huey, trusting her completely, nodded and said, "Take your time. I'll be here." Elena walked away, her heart racing, not with guilt but with anticipation. She made her way to the bathroom, where she had already agreed to meet Ryan, the first of Huey's friends. She texted the others to wait nearby and join her one by one. Ryan arrived first, slipping into the bathroom with a cocky grin. Elena's heart pounded as she let herself go, giving in to her darkest desires. It was quick and impersonal, just as she wanted. As soon as Ryan was done, he left, and Cole entered. One by one, Huey's 6 friends took their turn, each encounter more surreal than the last. Elena felt a strange mix of power and detachment, as though she were watching herself from outside her body. This wasn't about love or connection, it was about fulfilling a fantasy she had kept buried for far too long. Meanwhile, Huey remained at the party, sipping his drink and chatting with classmates. Occasionally, he glanced toward the hallway, wondering why Elena and Carla were taking so long. He also noticed that his 6 friends were nowhere to be seen, but he didn't think much of it. After all, it was a big party, and people were constantly coming and going. When Elena finally returned, she looked as composed as ever. Her makeup was flawless, her dress perfectly adjusted, and her smile warm and reassuring. She walked up to Huey, wrapped her arms around him, and said, "Missed me?" "Always," Huey replied, pulling her close. The rest of the night passed uneventfully. Elena acted as though nothing had happened, laughing and chatting as if everything were perfectly normal. Huey and Elena danced together as if they were the perfect couple. Huey, oblivious to the betrayal, felt like the luckiest guy in the world. When the party ended, Elena suggested staying over at Huey's apartment, as she often did. He agreed, happy to spend more time with her. They walked home together, hand in hand, under the soft glow of the streetlights. Back at the apartment, Huey made her a cup of tea before they went to bed. As they lay next to each other, he held her close, his heart full of love. Elena, however, stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the night. She felt no guilt, only a strange sense of satisfaction. For her, it had been an unforgettable experience, exactly what she had wanted. For Huey, it was just another ordinary night with the girl he loved. Neither of them could have guessed how quickly their world was about to unravel. The next morning dawned like any other. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of Huey's small apartment, casting a soft golden glow over the room. Elena stirred under the covers, still deep in sleep, while Huey was already awake, quietly admiring her. He often spent his mornings like this, marveling at how lucky he was to have her in his life. She looked so peaceful, her chest rising and falling gently, her hair spread messily across the pillow. To Huey, she was perfect, a vision of beauty and everything he had ever wanted. Despite his quiet admiration, he couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. Something about last night felt off, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Elena loved him, and that was all that mattered. As Huey got out of bed and began preparing breakfast, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. At first, he ignored it, focused on frying eggs and making coffee. But when it buzzed again and again, he frowned and picked it up. The screen displayed a notification from an anonymous email account. The subject line read, "You need to see this."
Curiosity piqued. Huey opened the email. What he saw made his heart stop. Attached were several video files, each labeled with a single name: Ryan, Cole, David, Lucas, Brandon, and Jake. Beneath the attachments, a short message read, "You deserve to know the truth. Last night, while you waited for her, this is what she was doing. Your friends betrayed you. And so did she. These videos are already out there. Everyone knows." For a moment, Huey stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. His hands trembled as he tapped on the first video. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Elena in the college bathroom, pressed against the wall. Her dress hiked up as she kissed Ryan. Huey's stomach churned as he watched them move together, the sounds of their encounter ringing in his ears like a death knell. He quickly shut the video, his chest tightening with panic. But something compelled him to open the next one. And then the next. Each video told the same story, Elena with one of his friends. One after the other. Their faces were unmistakable, their actions unforgivable. By the time he reached the final video, Huey felt like he couldn't breathe. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, his vision blurred with tears. He stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself. "It has to be fake. It has to be." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The details were too specific, the footage too damning. He replayed the events of the previous night in his mind: Elena's flirtatious behavior, her sudden disappearance, the prolonged absence of his friends. It all added up. And the realization hit him like a freight train. Elena had betrayed him. Huey's thoughts raced as a storm of emotions consumed him: anger, Heartbreak. Humiliation. He felt like a fool, an idiot who had trusted her and his so-called friends without question. The videos weren't just a betrayal of their relationship, they were a public humiliation. An open wound for everyone to see. He turned to look at Elena. Still asleep in his bed. Her face serene and untouched by guilt. The sight of her, so peaceful, so oblivious, made his blood boil. How could she lie there so calmly after what she had done? How could she destroy him and act like nothing had happened? Huey's hand tightened around his phone as a dark thought crept into his mind. For the first time in his life, he felt the stirrings of something dangerous. Something violent. But he shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Instead, he paced the apartment, running his hands through his hair and muttering to himself. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to confront Elena immediately. To wake her up and demand answers. Another part of him wanted to run, to leave the apartment. Leave the city. Leave everything behind. As he struggled with his emotions, his phone buzzed again. It was another email. This time from an unknown sender. It's everywhere now. They leaked it to the group chats. Everyone's seen it. Huey's heart sank further. His humiliation wasn't just private, it was public. His classmates, his professors, his entire college, they all knew. He imagined the whispers, the stares, the cruel laughter. The thought made his skin crawl. He glanced at Elena again. His mind replaying the words from the email, "She betrayed you." With trembling hands, he opened one of the videos again, forcing himself to watch. The more he saw, the angrier he became. Each frame was a dagger to his heart. Each sound a reminder of her betrayal. By the time he closed the video, his anger had turned into a seething rage. Huey couldn't contain himself any longer. He marched to the bedroom, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He stood over Elena, his shadow falling across her face. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. "Elena," he said, his voice low and trembling with fury. She opened her eyes, blinking sleepily. "Huey? What's wrong?" He didn't answer. Instead, he shoved the phone in her face. The video still playing. Her eyes widened as she realized what he was showing her. She sat up quickly, her face pale. "Where did you get this?" she stammered. "That's all you have to say?" Huey spat. "You're not even going to deny it?" Elena's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked away, her guilt written all over her face. You did this," Huey said, his voice cracking. "With them. My friends. You lied to me. You told me you were going to the bathroom with Carla. And then you. I'm sorry," Elena whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I was drunk." Huey stood over her trembling, the knife slipping from his bloodied hand and clattering onto the floor. The apartment was eerily silent except for Elena's faint, gasping breaths and the rapid thudding of Huey's heart. His rage, once all-consuming, began to subside, replaced by a sickening weight of realization. Blood covered his hands, the bed, the walls, everywhere. He stumbled backward, his chest heaving as he stared at what he had done. Elena lay on the bed, barely moving, her breaths shallow and labored. Her wide, tear-filled eyes looked at him, not with the fear they had held moments ago, but with something resembling despair, or perhaps disbelief. "What have I done?" Huey whispered. His voice hoarse. Barely audible. His knees buckled. And he collapsed onto the floor. His hands clutching his head as if he could somehow block out the horror before him. His body shook with uncontrollable sobs. The weight of his actions crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Elena tried to speak. Her lips moving weakly. But no sound came out. Her fingers twitched. Reaching out to him feebly. But the effort was futile. Huey's eyes darted to her. Panic and guilt overwhelming him. He crawled toward her. His hands trembling as they hovered over her blood-soaked body. "Elena." He choked on his words. His voice breaking. "I didn't mean. I didn't want." He couldn't finish the sentence. There were no words that could undo what he had done. Her hand fell limply to her side. Her eyes fluttering shut as her breathing grew fainter. The sight shattered whatever was left of Huey's composure. He scrambled to his feet. Frantically searching for his phone. He found it on the counter. Smeared with blood from his earlier grip. With trembling fingers. He dialed 911. The operator's voice on the other end was calm. Detached. 911, what's your emergency? Huey's voice came out in a broken sob. I hurt her. Oh my God. I hurt her. Please. You have to send someone. She's bleeding, she's dying. Please. Help. He rattled off the address. Barely able to speak through his tears. Stay on the line, the operator instructed. Help is on the way. Can you tell me? Huey dropped the phone. Unable to focus on their words. He turned back to Elena. Who lay motionless on the bed. He rushed to her side. Pressing his hands against the worst of the wounds. Desperate to stop the bleeding. Stay with me. Elena, he pleaded. His tears falling onto her pale face. Please don't leave me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Her eyes fluttered open briefly. Unfocused but still somehow looking at him. Her lips parted as if to speak. But all that came out was a faint, gurgling sound. Her chest rose and fell weakly. And then, it stopped. No, 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 no. Huey screamed. Shaking her lifeless body as if he could force her to come back. Don't do this. Elena. Please don't do this. His cries filled the apartment. Echoing off the blood-splattered walls. The sound of sirens grew louder. Cutting through the suffocating silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. Casting the chaotic scene in alternating hues of color. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Followed by loud knocking and voices shouting. Police! Open up! Huey didn't move. He sat on the floor beside the bed. Cradling Elena's lifeless body. His clothes and hands soaked in blood. The door burst open. And officers flooded into the apartment. Their weapons drawn. They froze momentarily at the sight before them, the broken young man holding the girl. His face a mask of anguish and regret. Put your hands where we can see them, one officer commanded. His voice firm but wary. Huey didn't resist. Slowly. He placed Elena's body back onto the bed. His hands shaking violently. He raised them in the air. His face streaked with tears. I did it, he whispered. His voice hollow. I killed her. I couldn't stop myself. The officers moved quickly. Handcuffing him and pulling him to his feet. Huey didn't fight them. He barely felt the cold metal against his wrists or heard the Miranda rights being read to him. His gaze remained fixed on Elena's still form as they led him out of the apartment. His heart shattering with every step. As the ambulance crew rushed past him to reach Elena, Huey whispered under his breath, "I loved you. I'm sorry." But his apology was swallowed by the chaos around him. Lost to the world forever. The aftermath of the tragedy rippled far beyond the individuals involved, leaving a community grappling with the weight of the events and their consequences. Huey, now in prison for life, spent his days in isolation, consumed by the reality of what he had done. The initial rage and betrayal that had driven him to commit such a heinous act had been replaced by a hollow numbness. In the sterile walls of his cell, he replayed the events in his mind over and over, unable to escape the images of Elena's face, her final breaths, and the love they once shared. His confession had been cold and detached at the time. But now, in the solitude of prison, the enormity of his crime began to fully sink in. Meanwhile, the college struggled to recover from the scandal. What had once been a vibrant and thriving campus was now overshadowed by whispers, rumors, and unease. Students found themselves divided in their opinions about the events, with some blaming Elena for her reckless actions and others condemning Huey's violent response. Conversations about relationships, morality, and betrayal dominated classrooms, dorm rooms, and online forums. Student organizations and faculty tried to turn the tragedy into an opportunity for learning, hosting discussions about toxic relationships, mental health, and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. But no initiative could erase the stain left on the campus community. The 6 friends who had participated in the betrayal faced severe consequences as well. Publicly shamed and ostracized. Their lives were forever altered. 2 of them dropped out of college entirely, unable to handle the scrutiny and judgment from their peers. The remaining 4 tried to continue their education but faced daily hostility, glares, whispers, and outright avoidance from classmates and professors alike. Their once tightly knit group dissolved, each member isolated and haunted by their role in the tragedy. Elena's parents bore the dual burden of mourning their daughter while grappling with the controversy surrounding her death. Her mother, Claudia, became a vocal advocate for her memory, giving interviews to humanize Elena beyond the scandal. She was more than her mistakes, Claudia said in one emotional television interview. She was my daughter. My little girl. She wasn't perfect. But no one is. She didn't deserve to die for her choices. Claudia's words struck a chord with some. But others remained critical, unwilling to separate Elena's actions from the events that followed. Elena's father, however, remained silent, devastated by the public exposure of his daughter's actions. Once a proud and respected figure in his community, he withdrew entirely, avoiding both the media and the neighbors who had once looked up to him. He struggled to reconcile the image of the daughter he had cherished with the person portrayed in the leaked videos. The family buried Elena in their hometown, far from the college and the memories of her final days. Few from the college attended her funeral, afraid to be associated with the scandal. For Huey's parents, the revelation of their son's crime was a devastating blow. His mother, Marissa, was inconsolable, refusing to accept that the caring and loving boy she had raised could have committed such a brutal act. Huey was a good boy, she told reporters. He loved Elena. He would never do something like this unless he was pushed beyond his limits. This wasn't who he was. Her words garnered sympathy from some. But others viewed them as an attempt to deflect blame from Huey's actions. Huey's father, however, struggled with profound shame. A quiet man by nature, he became even more withdrawn, refusing to speak publicly about his son. The crime and its aftermath created a rift in the family, with Marissa defending Huey at every turn while his father remained silent. Unable to reconcile the son he had known with the man who had committed such an atrocity. The story captivated the nation, sparking debates about morality, mental health, and the consequences of betrayal. 4 weeks. The media dissected every detail, from the leaked videos to Huey's confession to the ripple effects on the college and community. Commentators and pundits offered varying perspectives, some framing Huey as a victim of circumstance who had been driven to the brink, while others condemned him as a cold-blooded killer whose actions could never be justified. The tragedy became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how love, betrayal, and anger could spiral into violence and devastation. Years later, the story would still be whispered about in the halls of the college, the name Huey evoking memories of a dark chapter in its history. Both Elena and Huey, once full of promise and potential, were now forever remembered not for who they were, but for the choices that led to their shared downfall. The tragedy of Huey and Elena's story became an enduring symbol of the destructive power of betrayal, unchecked emotions, and the devastating aftermath of violence. Huey's life behind bars was a stark reflection of the choices he had made, a daily reminder of the irreversible damage caused by a single night of rage and despair. He had become a ghost of his former self, retreating further into isolation as the years went by. The once kind and sensitive boy was now hardened and withdrawn, consumed by regret and the endless replay of that fateful night in his mind. Marissa, Huey's mother, continued to visit him in prison, her heartbreak etched into every visit. Each time she saw him in his orange jumpsuit, shackled and surrounded by guards, her tears flowed freely. "Why didn't you come to me, Huey?" she asked repeatedly, her voice breaking with grief. "Why didn't you tell me how much you were hurting?" Huey, however, remained silent during these visits, unable to provide an answer that would ease her pain, or his own. The trial had been a spectacle, capturing the attention of the nation. The media dissected every detail of Huey and Elena's relationship, from their once perfect romance to the brutal murder that ended it. The defense painted Huey as a victim, a young man driven to the brink by emotional abuse, public humiliation, and betrayal. He was just a boy in love, his lawyer argued. A boy who trusted the wrong person and was pushed past his breaking point. But the prosecution focused on the calculated and deliberate nature of the murder, presenting Huey's confession and the premeditation behind his actions. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor said. This was cold, calculated, and vicious. When the judge handed down the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, the courtroom was silent. Huey showed no emotion, his face a blank mask as the weight of the sentence settled over him. For Elena's family, the verdict offered little solace. Her mother, Claudia, wept quietly, holding a picture of Elena close to her chest. Her father sat in silence, his face etched with grief and shame, unable to reconcile the vibrant, carefree daughter he had raised with the person portrayed in the leaked videos. The case ignited a national debate about betrayal, morality, and the consequences of revenge. Talk shows, podcasts, and social media were flooded with discussions about the tragedy. Some argued that Huey was a victim of emotional abuse and manipulation, A young man pushed to the edge by circumstances beyond his control. Others saw him as an embodiment of toxic masculinity, pointing to his possessiveness and inability to cope with rejection as the root of his violent actions. Similarly, opinions on Elena were deeply divided. Some sympathized with her, viewing her as a young woman who made mistakes and paid the ultimate price. Others criticized her harshly, blaming her reckless and selfish actions for the chain of events that led to her death. On campus, the tragedy left a lasting scar. The college administration struggled to contain the damage to its reputation, implementing policies to address mental health, consent, and healthy relationships. However, the once vibrant community remained overshadowed by whispers, judgment, and unease. The names of Elena, Huey, and the 6 friends involved became infamous, their actions the subject of hushed conversations and cautionary tales. Elena's grave, tucked away in her hometown, remained largely unvisited. Her parents mourned her in private, avoiding the public eye and the constant scrutiny of those who judged her actions. Her mother, Claudia, often spoke to Elena's memory in interviews, trying to humanize her beyond the scandal. She made mistakes, Claudia said, her voice trembling. But she didn't deserve to die for them. She was more than her worst choices. For Huey's parents, the weight of their son's actions was an unbearable burden. Marissa continued to write to Huey, even when her letters went unanswered, clinging to the hope that she could still reach the boy she had raised. Huey's father, on the other hand, withdrew from public life entirely, unable to face the judgment and pity of their community. "We did our best," he told a close friend in a rare moment of vulnerability. "But somewhere along the way, we failed him." The story of Huey and Elena became a somber cautionary tale. A tragedy without winners, only victims. It served as a grim reminder of how love, betrayal, and unchecked emotions could spiral into irreversible devastation. For those who knew them, and for the community that bore witness to the fallout, the wounds left by the tragedy would never fully heal.